Hi everyone, and welcome to today's chat. My name is Trinia. I'm a team member here at Understood. And today we're going to be running through the top questions that we've received from parents about ADHD. And we're so lucky to have Dr. Tom Brown joining us today to answer those questions. Hi Tom, how are you?
Hi Trini, how you doing? I'm really happy to be here for this project.
Oh, we're so excited you're here. Tom, do you want to take just a couple minutes to introduce yourself to our viewers?
Sure. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I was on the East Coast, running a clinic and teaching on the clinical faculty of the Department of Psychiatry at Yale Medical School for 20 years. Until 2 years ago, I made a move out to the West Coast so that I could live closer to my grandkids and my grown children. And here I run a clinic in Manhattan Beach, California, and I teach on the faculty of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences for the Keck Medical School at the University of Southern California. But I'm very interested in attention deficit disorder and related problems in kids and adults.
Absolutely, and you're definitely one of our top people that we turn to every time we have a question or we're writing some content about ADHD. Your perspective is really valuable, and I know that the videos that we have of you on site get a lot of comments and positive feedback from parents and young adults and people dealing with ADHD. So we're super excited to have you here. And the way that this chat is set up, it's a little different from our typical expert chats in that we've compiled a list of questions we received from parents over the last year.
Okay.
And so these are, a lot of parents have specific questions, but we try to generalize them and ask like the broader question that parents are trying to get at. And so we are going to run through, we have several questions that we're going to run through. We'll get through as many as we can in the time that's allowed. And I'm really excited for this chat today.
Good. Let's do it.
All right. So first, before we jump into those questions, do you want to give just a quick overview of what ADHD is and how it impacts people?
Yeah, actually, I've got a 28-minute video that's posted on the website where I do this in more detail. But the short version of it is that for many years, from 1902 until 1980, what we now call ADD or ADHD was always thought of as a behavior problem, and mostly it was just little boys who couldn't sit still, wouldn't shut up, and were driving everybody nuts. And it wasn't until 1980 that they put in the term attention deficit to the name of the disorder, until hooked to hyperactivity. But what we've been learning over more recent years is that I think you can write a statement that says, an equation says, ADHD equals developmental impairment of executive function. And the executive functions here that we're talking about are the functions that everybody needs to be able to manage themselves and do what they've got to do. And the model that I usually work with includes 6 parts. Being able to get organized and get started on things, being able to focus and then shift focus when you need to, being able to regulate alertness, which includes sleep problems, and sustain effort, and managing processing speed to fit the situation that you're in. Managing emotions, which is not part of the official diagnostic criteria for ADD, but anybody who knows anybody with ADHD knows that it's a big part of it for most people who have ADHD. And then working memory and being able to, not long-term storage memory so much as being able to hold things in one thing in mind while doing something else. And then finally, the 6th cluster is managing action, which usually is a way of trying to move from something where you're sort of jumping into things too fast or being too slow or too fast for the situation, and in trying to minimize being too impulsive, the sort of thing that people joke about is instead of ready, aim, fire, is ready, fire, aim. And being able to put those half dozen different pieces of functioning together to do what needs to be done. And the developmental part of it is important because the fact is, all of the symptoms of ADD are things every one of us has trouble with sometimes. It's just that people with ADHD have a lot more trouble with it. And so always in the case of ADHD, we're looking at how does this particular child, this particular teenager, this particular adult manage with these abilities that are tied to executive function relative to other people of the same age. Because the fact is that executive functions do not fully mature in any of us until about 18, 20, 25 years old. And so it's always a matter of comparing with other people and seeing how well this process is going on.
Absolutely.
So it's a complicated thing. It's not as simple as they used to think it was.
Oh, this is super helpful, though. And for those of our viewers who are looking for more details about ADHD and what it means, as Tom mentioned, he has a video on our site, the 28-minute ADHD primer. It's one of our most popular videos, even though it's so long. It goes into a lot of great detail and explanation. So thanks for mentioning that, Tom. So I want to get to our questions. And one of the top questions that we get from parents is, how do I find the best treatment? And this can be related to a lot of parents ask about medications, but then we also get a lot of questions about other types of treatment, whether that's therapy or making sure kids get enough exercise and sleep. And so I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about how can parents manage figuring out what the best treatment for their child is?
Sure. I think the most important thing to begin with is education about what ADHD is and what it isn't. There is so much misunderstanding about ADHD all over the place, not only among parents, but also among kids. And what they hear from their friends or what they hear from teachers, some teachers are really knowledgeable about ADHD, and some others have had very little training to understand it. And so I think the most basic thing, and the thing that we do in our clinic, is to spend quite a bit of time trying to explain to the patient and the family what is ADHD and how is it affecting you now? And because I think if a person, if a child or a teenager or adult understands what the set of problems is that we're talking about, they're going to be much more cooperative in trying to figure out ways of helping to improve it. So the first step is education about just the basic facts about ADD in language that fits the experience and the understanding of the person you're talking with. The most effective treatment we have for ADHD that's been scientifically demonstrated again and again is medication. Out of every 10 people diagnosed with ADHD who are given treatment with medication, it works for between 8 and 9 of them. Now, for some, it's huge how much medicine helps. For others, it's substantial, but it's not huge. Others, it helps a little, but not that much. And 2 out of 10, it doesn't do a damn thing. So the thing to keep in mind about medication is that, yes, that is generally our most effective tool. But there are a number of ways in which that sometimes becomes problematic. And one of them is that there are many prescribers, physicians and nurse practitioners and others who prescribe, who have had very little training about how to prescribe the medicines that are needed for ADHD, specifically the stimulants. The ones we use most frequently are methylphenidate. People know the brand name Ritalin, and the amphetamines. People know the name Dexedrine or Adderall. But there are a number of other delivery systems for each of these medicines. But the general principle that it's really important to have in mind is the amount of medication a person needs has very little to do with how old they are, how much they weigh, or how severe the symptoms are. There are some little kids who, most little kids will take just very small doses, but there are a few of them, same size as the others. We've got to go up to the adult dosing range to touch them because their bodies are just not that sensitive to that medicine. And among the adults we see, there are some people who are way taller and fatter than I am, who are taking no more than you give a typical 5-year-old. So the point here is simply that the right amount of medicine for a particular person is tied to how sensitive their body chemistry is to that medicine. And so the general principle is it ought to be started at a baby-sized dose, and then you sort of stair-step it up little by little, looking for that sweet spot between too little and too much. If you have too little, it doesn't do a damn thing. You might just as well be taking breath mints. If you have too much, then you're likely to be in a situation where you get kind of jittery or you've got other side effects that you don't want to have to deal with. So medication is important, but you mentioned sleep and diet. Decent sleep is important. Now, there's some differences even among people of the same age, whether they're young kids or older, in terms of how much a person really needs. But getting adequate sleep, decent quality of sleep, makes a huge difference in terms of how our executive functions function. The diet thing, having a decent, healthy diet certainly makes a difference as it does for everybody else. However, the exclusionary diets, there have been a lot of efforts that go way back for keeping kids off of sugar or keeping kids off of this or that other food colorings or things like that. For the most part, those things do not hold water scientifically. Once in a while, you'll run into somebody who's got some peculiar allergies to particular foods or things that are included in foods. But the fact is, ADHD is not generally any response to particular food products. And that taking a kid off of something, for most kids, except for people who have some relatively rare allergies, doesn't really provide effective treatment. If you go online, you can find all kinds of things that people advertise as alternatives to medication because a lot of parents are frightened about medicine, needlessly, I think, or at least excessively. And so they want to, they'll go for some of these brain training programs or biofeedback technology and that sort of thing to try to provide an alternative treatment. And the fact is, there's been quite a bit of research on it now, both in Europe and here in the United States. And what it demonstrates is that if you really look at the scientific evidence, those alternative treatments do not have good, solid evidence for their effectiveness. You find a lot of people who get enthusiastic about them, but what they found was if you looked at studies where the person who's assessing, does it help, is a person who had a big stake in whether or not it was going to working because they spent a lot of money to get it, or they're making the kids use a computer program that the kid may be reluctant to do sometimes, or they've got some biofeedback program that sometimes the kid is enthusiastic about and other times not. If the person who's trying to answer the question, is it working, is a person who's invested in that treatment, the results often look fairly good. But if you do evaluations by people who have no stake in it and don't know who had the treatment and didn't, it doesn't meet scientific standards. So basically what I'm trying to say is that most of these brain game things or work on your computer and expand your working memory and expand your attention, the advertising does not reflect what the facts are. And that for most people, their experience with it is that it doesn't make any difference. If you use some of these computer programs, you play this game on your video game types on the screen, then they'll give you some other games like that to show that you've learned a skill. And the critical element when you're looking at that kind of a treatment is, does it generalize? Does it help? Of course, if you're practicing video game A and then you have to go to video game B and it's just a little bit different from A, chances are you're going to get pretty good at doing that kind of video game. But the fact is that doesn't make any significant difference in, can you remember what you just read 2 paragraphs ago?
Exactly.
And are you able to keep in mind what the question was that you're trying to answer on the test?
Right. And that leads great into our second question, which is, how can I help my child be a more successful learner? And a lot of times that is the main concern, right? We have kids that are not doing well in school, they're falling behind, they're unable to get their homework done or stay organized enough to turn in their homework. And so parents are looking for, what are some strategies that do work for helping kids learn these kind of executive function skills, as you were talking about, the organization and the focus, and the things that lead them to be more successful in school as learners?
Well, I think setting up some structure, for example, around homework. So you cut off the electronics, except insofar as they're specifically needed for doing the assignment, because a lot of kids have to do homework on their computers. And take a door open approach to it. You don't go into your room and shut the door while you're supposed to be doing homework. I want to have you where I can see what you're doing. so that if you're just messing around, that becomes obvious. And the other thing, though, is that you're not, in addition to rules thing, just showing interest in what the kid is doing, talking with them about what is this new social studies project you're working on? What are you working on in math? You said you had a hard time on the last test. What is it? What was it covering? And do we need to maybe put some extra time in together to do that? To be able to encourage what they're doing. Now, back to one thing, though, that's about homework that I think is important to keep in mind about medication is many kids are taking what's supposed to be so-called all-day medicines for ADHD. And the reality is, for some people, these medicines that you take at 7 o'clock in the morning really do last at least through the school day, and maybe for an hour or two afterwards. But the reality is that there are many kids where they don't even make it through the school day. And so a lot of kids who need medicine to help them work effectively in school also need a booster dose of medicine to be able to help late afternoon. And there it's a balancing act because you want to be sure you're not interfering with their appetite for dinner or keeping them up half the night. But the fact is there are a lot of individual variations on this. And so if you're expecting a kid who really needs the help of medication to be able to focus very much, to do homework at a time when the medication is worn off, it's not going to work out very well. Another thing that I think is important is, a lot of times as parents, we know the importance of getting the homework done, and we get on our kids about it. And the kids will be, complaining about what the teacher said or what seems unreasonable about it. And I think it's important not to try to polarize discussion with kids about that sort of thing, to be willing to empathize with the kid. It does look like that's an awfully long assignment, or yeah, it's hard to have 3 tests to study for the same night. So that it doesn't become a matter of just, I am the taskmaster and I just want to make you do this. I don't want to hear any complaints about this. Teachers are sometimes unreasonable, just as parents are sometimes unreasonable and kids are sometimes unreasonable. And it's important to allow for that. And, keep in mind what it was like when you were a kid having to do homework and were suffering with more work than you felt you could easily manage, and particularly for those kids who have learning disorders, where reading is particularly tough for them, or they work hard to learn multiplication tables but can't get them retrievable in their heads. Or a kid who might be able to talk a story to you very well, but when it comes to sitting down and writing it, it's a whole different ballgame. So I think empathy for the kid's struggles with work, and trying to the usual thing about you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar works on this too, to encourage, give good recognition for the things that the kid is doing right, and not just hassle them about the things that they're not doing well. But also the thing is acting interested in it and being interested in it, because sometimes getting the student to tell you about what they're learning and stuff, you might want to say, that is interesting. I didn't know about that, and maybe get more information together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love those points of showing interest in what the kids are working on. And we know that parents who have those high expectations and let their kids know like that school is important leads to better outcomes and kids who are more engaged in school, even when it's really difficult. And so things
Sure.
that you mentioned, like setting up the structure for homework time, and trying to provide kids with that support and that empathy that, yes, this is hard, but it's something that we can get through, we can work on this, and it's going to lead towards better outcomes, more success, more good feelings of a job well done. And it kind of leads into my next question. We receive a lot of questions from parents about how to work with schools, how to work with the teachers, how to work with administration to make sure that their kids' needs are getting met at school, and whether that's accommodations or interventions. Can you talk a little bit about how parents can work with schools to make sure their kids' needs are getting met?
Yeah, I think, again, it's important to try to develop a decent working relationship with a teacher. And most teachers are accessible for that. But it's also true that teachers are human beings, And some teachers may just be starting out and they've got a lot of trouble managing the classroom, or are still in the early learning stages of how to do their work. Some teachers may be at a particular point, like any of the rest of us. They're going to get up some mornings when it's just not a good day, and sometimes teachers are unreasonable. Um, and so I think just to sort of recognize the humanity of the teacher and the constraints that they're operating under is important. Another thing that's important, I think, is to provide teachers information about your child who's having some difficulties that might help them understand better where the kid is coming from, or how this particular student is experiencing this kind of work. Because most teachers are really pretty, empathetic about that if they've got the information. Or, for example, if the kid is going through a hard time, maybe there's a lot of difficulty at home, where parents have been arguing, and there's some uncertainty about whether the parents are going to stay together. And the kid is trying to get to sleep at night at times when they're having to listen to the bitter arguments and multiple threats. There's some situations where a grandparent might be seriously ill, and the whole family is preoccupied with that. Or when parents' shift schedules have changed, and the usual parental help for supervising homework is not going to be available. To let teachers know about this kind of thing, but also to do it in reasonable doses. There are sometimes you talk with teachers and they'll tell you that they have one or two students whose parents seem to believe that their child is the only child this teacher's working with. And they'll make them write them very long notes, pages and pages about things that are going on that could have been said much more simply. Or they're demanding a lot more paperwork back from the teacher about things. So, just sort of keeping in mind the teacher is a human being, and he or she is having to live their own life as a person and as a professional. And it's harder for people when they're first getting started, in that job as it is in any other. But also just to provide, down to earth, realistic information about your son or daughter. And for example, if you've got somebody who just really struggles to get homework done, or who's had a lot of trouble reading, do not assume that the teacher has necessarily read all the papers in the file for your son or daughter. Give them the executive summary in conversation or in a note, just to clue them to the fact that there are some difficulties. Because, on the one hand, the teachers ought to be reading the 504 plans and the IEPs that have been done for kids that have more troubles. But on the other hand, it's also true that sometimes that just does not happen. And so when a child is moving into with the teacher for the first time, or at a time when there's a lot of difficulty, it's important to communicate and to also be receptive, and not feel like you have to be the defense attorney every time the teacher is calling or commenting to you about some difficulty with your son or daughter. You want to listen to it and think, okay, well, how would I be feeling about it if I was trying to manage 20 other kids or more in this classroom, and something like what I just heard my son or daughter was doing was going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love how you pointed out it's important to have that communication and that empathy for the teacher and how much they're taking on with all of the students in their classroom. And speaking as a former teacher myself, I definitely empathize with that feeling of wanting to meet each kid's needs. And we know that most teachers are really trying to do the best job that they can, and they want your child to be successful. And so trying to create that relationship where the two of you can work together to figure out what's going to work for your child. It's not the teacher doesn't have all the answers, and you as the parent don't have all the answers. But together, a lot of times you can come up with those creative ideas that might work.
Exactly. And then you need to deal with the teacher that I'm not going to believe everything I'm told about you if you don't believe everything that my kid tells you about me.
Exactly. Tom, I want to move on to our next question, which is about behavior.
Mhm.
We get so many questions from parents about how to teach their kids, how to self-regulate, how to manage their emotions, how to manage their impulses, and just those social skills and social behaviors that are expected from kids in all environments, in school and out of school. Do you have suggestions or tips for parents of how they can work with their kids on behavior?
Yeah, well, it obviously depends on the kid and on the behavior. It's hard to give generalized advice on that, but I think the one thing to keep in mind is that there's a variety of what kids are able to do at the same age. That all 5-year-olds are not going to be able to do the same things. All 15-year-olds are not able to do the same things. There are individual differences in that. The other thing is that if a kid is having behavior problems, one important rule is not to get locked in to playing videotapes back and forth about the interactions, because you end up parents can end up sort of shaking their fingers about you always do this and you always do that, and then kids have their videotapes they play for the parent as well. You want to listen and try and have some effort to try and understand what's the problem they're trying to solve. And another thing that's important is if a kid is arguing with you, um, you don't want to get launched into an argument where it's a five and I'll raise you five. Things, for example, if your son or daughter starts raising their voice, that's the time to lower your voice and to talk more quietly, because our kids have a unique ability. They know us, and they know how to push our buttons in the same way that we know how to push their buttons. But often we're doing that with each other and not even realizing it. And if you've got a parent and a kid shouting at each other, probably neither one of them is listening. So trying to keep it cool. And Tom Phelan has written several books. It's Phelan, has written several books on trying to deal with kids of different ages. And one of the points he makes that I think is really important is that often parents talk too much when you're trying to explain the 50 reasons why the kid should be doing this or that. And you're usually much better off if you simply say, hey, look, okay, now this is the thing which needs to be done. And I understand you have this problem with it. But the fact is, it does need to be done. And if you're not able to do that, then I'm going to have to do some things that'll try and encourage you to do it. I may offer a reward if you get it done because it's a particular difficult thing for you, or I may, have to do something to punish you to, make the message come through to you that it's not your choice about this. It really does need to be done. But there's so many parents get caught up in explaining again and again and again the same things, and it's like you could just have a tape recorder and just push the button and play the same speech, and it's not being listened to, and so being able to make allowance for the fact, particularly with your first kid. I think any of us are the first children we're raising. Often we're trying to do things. We swear we're not going to do it the same way our parents did, but often find the same words and the same tone of voice coming out of our own mouths with things that we didn't like much when we were on the receiving end of it. Another thing I would add is that kids with ADHD very often have more than just one problem. That many of for example, the incidence rate for anxiety disorders in children in the general population is 5%, more or less, depending on which studies you're looking at. The incidence of anxiety disorders in children with ADHD is 35%. And so if you've got a kid with ADD, it's very likely there's something else going on. It may be that they've had a lot more anxiety than usual. It may be that they're kids who get really discouraged very easily, and it doesn't take them much to begin to feel like it's hopeless. I'm not going to be able to do this.
And
And
Tom,
then
you're reading my mind. Our last question that I wanted to ask you was about how can parents tease apart the different issues that their kids might be dealing with. So you mentioned kids have a higher likelihood of having anxiety if they have ADHD.
Yeah.
And if kids are dealing with these multiple issues, I know kids might also have learning disabilities and have ADHD.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you tease these things apart and
You
know
really
what's
need
ADHD?
some help. You listen to the kid as they describe for you what they like and don't like and what they do well and what trouble. Listen to the teacher, particularly teachers who've been at it for a while, they've got the benefit of being able to see a lot of interaction with a lot of kids at the same age as your son or daughter. And it gives you a little better base from it. But it's also true that often you need some extra help from a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a social worker or a guidance counselor. And all of these people come in varying degrees of level of experience and training and competence. But to be able to get some help in sorting out some of these things, because kids have ways of I guess we all do, of being able to sort of cover our weaknesses by attacking whoever's criticizing us, or by presenting it as though it's something else. And there are things like, for example, when you're dealing even with middle school kids, there are some middle school kids who are getting high many times a week, and it's not necessarily noticeable to the parent. Because the kids sort of keep to themselves. So you got to consider the possibility of that, or a kid who may be having sleep troubles that they don't talk much about. Some kids will, talk your arm off about them, but others, are, having a hard time staying, getting to sleep. And it may be that they're worried to death about fragments of conversations they've overheard between parents about money shortages or about some relative who's sick or dying. Or something they've heard from some friend. And, for example, you have a kid come home and telling you that one of the other kids has a grandparent who just died and the kid had to go to the funeral. And it's important to think about anytime something like that happens, one of the first questions that the kid is going to have is that going to happen to my grandmother or my grandfather? Or to my father or my mother? To try to listen to the kids and encourage them to tell you what they're thinking about, but also encourage them to deal with the world as it is, and that there's sometimes that things happen which are sad and frustrating, above all, you just want to help your kid feel like you care about them and appreciate them for who they are, in spite of whatever struggles they may be having at the time.
Yeah, so it sounds like talking to your kid, but also to guidance counselors or teachers, a therapist if your child is seeing a therapist, to try to figure out how your child is feeling and tease apart those differences between what is ADHD and what is something else that might be bothering your child as well.
Yeah, because that can go either way. Sometimes it really is ADHD, and other times it's something else masquerading as ADHD.
Tom, unfortunately, we're out of time, but this has been super helpful. Do you have any last words you wanted to leave our viewers with?
Yeah, check the website. There's a lot of good information there,
Thank you.
I think you can learn from other parents who've posted information as well as from the people who've written up things, and check the videos. It's a very valuable site. And then the other thing is, I think, talk to parents, talk to teachers, talk to other parents who are struggling with the same thing, because it's not easy work raising kids these days, and it's sort of the most important work we do.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Tom. And thank you to all of our viewers for joining us. If you want to see our upcoming chats, you can go on our website at u.org/calendar. And you can also join our community where, as Tom said, you can talk with other parents, people who might be going through the same issues as you are, and have some good advice or suggestions. And you can find that at u.org/community. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.